We are beautiful, we're irrefutable, we are omnipotent, we're militant, resilient, we're autonomous. We are the consequence, we are consciousness. We are the heartbeat of every freedom fighter who came before us, and all will come after.
Feral, adjective, especially of an animal in a wild state after escape from captivity or domestication.
Alcatraz, Arab Spring, 1 billion rising. Freedom schools, the Maroons, rebellion thriving. We've been rising since the dawn of creation. Sun in the blood of our veins, liberation runs.
Welcome to Feral Visions, a decolonial feminist podcast brought to you by the grassroots adult freedom school Liberation Spring. I'm your host, Anjali Nathupadhyay. Let's begin with a content note or trigger warning. Here at Feral Visions, we go deep, and that often means courageously addressing imperialist, white supremacist, cis-heteropatriarchal, capitalist settler colonialism in order to support healing and transformation. Bypassing isn't an option. The only way out is through. The time for denial is over, and today's a great day to keep it real. Since we're unapologetically truth-telling, please practice excellent self and community care while listening. To begin on that note, I invite you to join me for one deep breath right now so that we can be as present as is realistically possible moving forward with this dialogue. If you're feeling it, do inhale, then exhale with me right now. Thank you for showing up to do this work. Let's dive right in.
To the place where we can all attain emancipation from oppression, break the chains from Haiti to Tibet and worldwide. Don't forget the resistance in our roots and resilience in our breath, in the blood of our veins. Liberation runs. We are standing on the shoulders of the ancient ones.
Welcome, folks. Great to be connecting. Just about to be in dialogue around embodying the revolution and really looking forward to being able to see where we can go. Welcome. Good to see y'all with integrity, with intention for the sake of our collective liberation. And so I appreciate y'all being here. Really looking forward to being able to get into it with you. And so if y'all are at all interested in just pausing to maybe silence your notifications to be able to really make the most of this precious opportunity to be able to share this space together, I invite you to do so. Or maybe if you might like to grab a notebook or perhaps a writing utensil, that would be fabulous, just so that we can be prepared to dive into this potent material together. Perhaps you want to get cozy or maybe hydrate like I am about to do. I sincerely encourage that as well, because as you can imagine, we're going to be going deep, and so it is important to bring our full selves into that labor. You know, I also just want to share first off a little bit of what some folks call, right, a sort of content note or a so-called trigger warning. And for me, part of the intention there is because, like my students know, to me it is just non-negotiable that we honor and that we seek to embody exquisite honesty. And in an omnicide like this, right, in a moment of having to deal with this, right, death culture that is so dominant in the mainstream culture, it's important for us to reasons might come up, injustice might come up, trauma might come up. That's absolutely to be anticipated. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you.
Hey, can you hear me good?
Just fine. Well, Dewan, I was just sharing with folks a little bit of a sort of a welcome. What an honor to be able to come together in these times.
Yes,
thank you to our listeners, right? A little bit of a content note, because of course we're both unapologetically committed to honesty. So who knows where the dialogue will take us, right?
We'll try not to go in too much, but you know how it is. That's okay.
Right. Well, and you know, I would also like to thank you so much for the work that you do, just being able to come into contact with your contributions to creating revolutionary theory, and in a way that is unequivocally grounded in, right, our movements and our communities has
That's
been
right.
really encouraging for me. I came
Thank
into
you.
contact with your work, right, through your collaboration with No White Saviors. And their work is distinct, right? It's really a gift for folks to encourage us to be more substantially decolonial. And so
Right.
thank you so much for
Thank
those
you. Thank you.
contributions and for taking this time. I really appreciate that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, do you want to do maybe just a little round of intros for our
Okay.
folks before we dive right in?
For sure. For sure. So people who may not be as familiar with me or my work, my name is Owens. You know, it's crazy. One crazy thing about capitalism, you always define by what your job is, meaning like what makes money, right? As opposed to what's most important to you. So I want to just put that out there. So I'm a prize fighter by trade, but I also do a lot of work in gender-based violence prevention and intimate partner violence prevention. That's something that's very, very important to me. By ideology, I'm a Pan-Africanist. You know, probably like I always say, the most definitive measure of who I am is I'm someone who's about justice. So in being about justice, I believe in kind of laying siege to all of these systems of oppression, all of them. You know what I mean? And, you know, not just in my heart, but actively going out into the world to try to, you know, transform the hearts and minds of people as I educate myself more as well.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate your sharing what you did, especially so that my folks can be connected with your work and to get a sense of where you're coming from and what encourages you in this moment. You know, I could share on my end of things. So my name is
Please do.
Padia. Yeah. And I'm the founder of Liberation Spring, which is a grassroots community education program that's existed for the past 5 years that is unequivocally in the service of decolonization. And so, right, moving beyond educational spaces that are hidden behind paywalls or that might be, right, sites of gatekeeping or censorship, instead really creating community spaces for us to be able to come together and unapologetically center the kinds of knowing, remembering, imagining, unlearning that's going to support us getting free.
That's right. Wonderful.
Awesome. Well, I know that we had discussed the idea of possibly getting into what embodiment, what strategy, what bringing an instinct and intuition might look like and feel like in this revolutionary context that we're in. And so I'm wondering if you have any sense of where you might like to get us going around that.
Yeah, I think this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I don't want it just to dominate the conversation, but I think it's very important in terms of people who are committed to justice. And it's kind of like the idea of being aware of the kind of reframing of justice work. And, you know, this idea that when we prioritize justice, sometimes that's going to come with real sacrifice. You know what I mean? One of my favorite writers, Arundhati Roy, she said, she had you already know, don't get me started. She had a quote that said, you know, justice isn't just, you know, a cushy 9 to 5 with, you know, with benefits on the side. Like, to a certain degree, if you are holding the establishment accountable, that's going to come with some element of risk, right?
Thank you.
And if what you're doing doesn't, then you might want to question, you know, your strategy and how effective the way you fight something is. So one thing, like, is it takes both sides. It takes, like, the idea of building and constructing a new reality, and also a dismantling of current systems of oppression that benefit from subjugation of people, right? So it's two-sided. But I think that too often there's the kind of dominant contemporary pedagogy around justice work is reform as opposed to revolution. And even if we think of, like, reform, even then, it's basically concessions that the establishment chooses to make, but they're choosing what they want to give you. So by the time they give you that, whatever they choose to give you, they already have some other complex way of extracting whatever kind of resources or energy they want. They're not going to give you something without already having it covered on the back end. You understand?
That's right.
So
Precisely.
these kind of symbolic trappings are, yeah, you know.
Yeah,
I don't want to go too heavy too early.
Right? No, we can go there. My folks are definitely accustomed to that, right? So yeah, we don't do small talk. So not while our planet is on fire. Yeah, no, I so appreciate you saying that. And
Don't let me spit this water out.
So, You know, it was amazing because actually in one of the classes I was teaching on Monday, folks were legit talking about
Planet on fire.
reform.
Yeah,
Yeah, like let's
it
just
is.
be honest, because we can, like, you know, like our life depends on it, because oh right, it does.
That's
And
right.
so yeah, we were talking about reformism as a form of fatalism.
Ooh,
Like, let's
speak on it.
be honest,
That's
right?
right.
And this is why I've been talking so much more about dignity in my teaching, because if we had any embodied sense of dignity, would we put up with that?
That's
What
right.
even is that
That's
incrementalism?
right.
Poison fronting is medicine. We just need to be truthful.
No, I agree. I think the prioritization of respectability, the prioritization of kind of like, you know, this kind of peer acceptance, that's a detriment to, you know, legitimate work. You know, no one wants to be a social leper. And I think a lot of times we socialize into prioritizing what people think over what we truly believe, even if what we believe is something that's beneficial to society and humanity. And it's weird. It's like you said, I don't know when that kind of changed. I know when we're, you know, young folk growing up, will watch TV shows, will watch movies, and everybody wants to be a hero. Everybody wants to be a hero,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's all
Yep.
about courage. It's all
Right.
about, you know, standing up for what's right. And then somewhere in our adolescence, that kind of gets lost. You kind of, it's kind of like this reality sets in. Well, not only reality, the creation of reality sets in that says like, hey, you know what? You're powerless. You know, you don't have the power to change the world. Good doesn't always win. So you might as well not even try to fight evil. You might as well just try to make a little safe space for yourself and you know, go along to get along. That process kind of happens, and you know, it's a frustrating thing. And I think a big part of that is like people who are righteous, people who are about justice. We're socialized to be very passive. We're socialized to think that, you know, being good in your heart is enough to change the world, as opposed to going out and challenging evil. You know what I mean? And laying siege to evil and holding people accountable, people you know and people you don't know.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, and you know, the thing around that is it's just such doublespeak, right? I mean, just like with these lies related to freedom or justice or equality or whatever it might be within the matrix, like you can directly map the correlation between how dishonest that rhetoric is and the material circumstances that we're actually in. Like, why would you be beating people over the head with that if it was evident and apparent because it was true, right? So same with the hero thing, you know, it's like the obsession within, Hollywood propaganda with these tough guys, and with this approach to having courage that then, people engage in escapism or in fantasy and then go back to being agents of the Matrix.
Listen, they'll watch damn Hunger Games and be like, yeah, you know, forget the establishment. You seen the third Hunger Games, right? They'll watch that. No. They'll overthrow the government, and then, but anyway, the concept of you know, fighting for justice and equity. They'll, you know, and then once they get out the movie theater, and you know, Hunger Games just an example, but we see that in so many movies and so many things that we love seeing it. But it's like, yeah, I'll watch y'all doing it, but that's different. Well, if I do it, that's gonna take some risk, and I'm not willing to do that. So I'll live vicariously through you.
Thank you. Well, and you know, this is one of the reasons why, to me, it's so important for us to take seriously our bodies as one site of being honest, at minimum with ourselves, let alone with other people. Like, first and foremost, let's not lie with ourselves. And around that, asking people, what does the embodiment of honesty feel like when the mainstream culture is this death machine, right? Because for so many of us, it can be terrifying. It can feel deeply uncomfortable, right? You can feel like an outcast because you are being retaliated against, because you're actually confronting power. It's not a popularity contest. And so I really encourage people to take seriously that those feelings might actually be an indication that that's the embodiment of integrity if we're in a context that's as distorted as the one that we're in right now.
Well, they know what it is. It's that, you know, again, speaking of feminists, that kind of double consciousness, right? It's like that, you know, if we think of the cognitive dissonance, like it's that internal battle of, like, you know, like we said before, the creation of normality, and it's like this being accepted, but I know in my heart something's wrong. I just don't have an outlet to enact that, or I don't have a system in place that recognizes that, and that we don't, unfortunately, we've got to create, as people who are about justice and equity, we've got to create a system that encourages that and rewards it. Because Dr. Amos Wilson used to always say, power has the ability to create behavior by rewards and punishment. And he used to say that rewards are a means of control just as much as punishment. So,
that's right.
So if we think about society today, who's rewarded for being courageous? What does the society do to whistleblowers? Tell me what happened to whistleblowers. They wound up dead, or they wound up in jail. And
reality winner with COVID in jail right now.
Come on now. Now maybe a few generations down, maybe you'll blow up and then become a signal of revolution, and that capitalism will make some money off your face, like Che Guevara or something like that, right?
Clearly, T-shirts.
100%, or your face on the trucker hat or something. But besides that,
thank you.
There's nothing that incentivizes people to take risk and to be unapologetic about calling out the bullshit. And I also think, and maybe this is just where I'm at in my development right now. Maybe it's a change, but I don't agree with like the concept of degrees of evil anymore. At this point, if your ass is on the fence, or if you're an enabler, then we got to just throw your ass on the other side, because evil, like we'll call it the kind of apathetic middle, that middle ground. That's like, hey, I don't like this thing, but I don't feel badly enough about it to actively do something about it. Then you got to be on the side of the oppressor. We're not going to give you a safe space. We're not going to let you benefit from anything that we create, anything, even if it's just our company and our support. Because for evil, especially hierarchical violence, to exist, there has to be a culture of just cowardice. You understand what I mean?
Absolutely. That's right. Precisely. That's the foundation that allows a handful of annihilationists to destroy us, the planet, and the possibility of our descendants even having a viable planet to be able to live on, is people's apathy, right? And if they know better, if they pretend to have a heart or some conscience or a spine or a mind, or to be using any of those things, then they're more accountable, frankly, right? So yeah, it's so necessary to not play into that kind of purity politics, but to hold people accountable. And why wouldn't we? We're capable of that, right? Have some respect for your potential.
And if you don't, again, fine, then take your ass over there. But here's the thing. Here's what these double dippers want to do. Right? They want to benefit from the harm indirectly, but still have the ability to seem virtuous as some way to kind of like legitimize their humanity. That's the psychosis. You know what I mean? Of cowardice. You know what I mean? I want to watch. I'm not going to step in when something happens to you. But then I'll come to you when no one's looking to say like, hey, it's really messed up what they did to you. They shouldn't have did you like that, dog. That was cold, Dewan. Then go back to the oppressor class or whoever's doing harm and just be chilling and kicking it and hanging out.
Folks in your DM saying, wow, I'm so grateful that you're out there doing that thing that they didn't actually have your back in. The Black Lives Matter flyers that are in the windows of gentrifiers' neighborhoods after they've kicked people out of their own neighborhoods.
Oh my, don't get me started. Yes. Yeah, it's weird. Like I said, it's and I think that's just a kind of manipulative trick of not just that people have learned from the establishment, that people have learned from power, like the idea of just gaslighting whoever's being harmed. And I think like we talked about this before, that power, we really need a kind of reframing of our idea and our relationship with power. And we need to understand that, power is not a bad thing. It is it's a necessary thing. And when you don't, I was about to say necessity, but yeah, same thing. But when you don't have power and you come to the negotiating table, you're not negotiating, you're bargaining. When you're bargaining, old phrase in the South, my elders used to say, beggars can't be choosers. So you're not in the position to demand shit.
That's right.
Because you do not have something in place to punish someone if they don't do what you say do. And sometimes, like, I ain't saying that's got to be like violence, but sometimes it's like our collective solidarity of saying, hey, we're not going to support this thing. we're not going to buy this thing, or you ain't going to have no safe place to go without being called out. There's no organizing around power, and that is a serious mistake in analysis in terms of people who want to do this work.
Thank you. You can say that again. And, you know, it's just a matter of boundaries fundamentally for people that are into that language at an individual level. They can pause and they can reflect on what does that mean for our communities, right? Because again, if people are going to try to pretend to be consensual, then we need to be able to say no, right? So why is it that so few people know that they're able to say no to so many of these forms of injustice that get so deeply normalized in the nonprofit system, in academia, when people are trying to find jobs, when people are looking for some sense of financial security under capitalism, and we need to be able to have standards. Right now, it's not even like there's a low bar, it's like there's a non-existent bar. Case in point, so much that's happening throughout the planet right now. And so, yeah, really nothing like taking it back to that, dignity and that awareness that we can do better, right? We need to get our minds out of the gutter. We can expand our imagination. That's embarrassing. It's disrespectful to ourselves and to one another, and to really invite ourselves to do better.
That's right. It's definitely disrespectful to our it's it. Matter of fact, it's disrespectful to us, our ancestors, and our descendants. Because you know, we're not going nearly as hard. I can't even say nearly as hard. We're not going hard at all.
Thank you. Right?
It's you know, one thing I do want to say while we on this live is pessimism is the enemy of progressive and justice work, but at the same time, there has to be a element of realism, and it's kind of like this kind of socialized optimism. Like, let me just there's nothing cute about being naive. Some people think naivete is like, that shit is cute for kids. But as grown folk, like your naivete can causes harm. It definitely enables harm. So
that's right.
We can't let people shame us into thinking that calling out some bullshit is worse than doing the bullshit.
That part, right. And it also is something that I see, especially so many women that I work with getting caught up in. And I feel like that's just marketed and sold to oppressed people in general in a way that is very disproportionate, right? This kind of, pop psychology that people call, positive psychology, that is a delusion, is a complete and utter smoke and mirrors show. And that is exactly, like you said, deadly.
It's a product that's being sold.
Misinformation, psychological warfare. We can talk about psychological operations. That would be a psychological operation. The gaslighting that you spoke to, that is so deeply systematized that to begin to be honest in the face of it, you are going to be an outlier.
Now you're radical.
More of our folks wake up.
Outlier, now you're a bully. If you call out the goofiness, now now you're radical. Now you're trying to stop, progressiveness and
right. Having standards, right? Countercultural these days. Truthfulness, 100%. Countercultural these days. That's right.
But that's what we mean when we talk about the power of the establishment as a legitimizer. We're socialized to think that ain't nothing to legitimize until they say this. So they even unfortunately have the ability to legitimize what's deemed effective in the response to their bullshit. So we're opposing oppression. We're advocating for justice. As the young folks say, we're caping for justice, but we're going to let the people that we're opposing dictate what's legitimate justice work. Come on. That's precisely the stupidity.
Right. Yeah, no, we just need to unlearn that yesterday to be able to actually ground in substantial alternatives that, spoiler alert, probably aren't going to be in the core curricula, probably aren't going to be in the corporate media, probably aren't going to be found in graduate programs these days, certainly in the settler colonial US. And so, people really just need to have some standards and have some respect for our capacity to perceive and exercise those lies up out of us, because this is literally life and death, like it's been for over half a millennia minimum.
And the crazy thing is, like, when you say that's a great point. When you say this is life or death, if you look at when do we reach kind of critical mass of like, hey, y'all, something's wrong, is when it's death, but it's a kind of a death that goes against the rules of how they're allowed to kill us. You see what I'm saying? So it's like,
Right.
yo, y'all can kill us with this slow death. You can kill us with
Thank you.
gentrification. You can kill us with
That's
school to
right.
prison pipeline. You can
Thank
kill us
you.
with the prison industrial complex. You can kill us with gentrification. But when you just flat out execute us in a public way, now we got to act mad. And then
Precisely.
as long as you're showing it, not only act mad, but act
Thank
mad
you.
as long as you're showing it to usually to take away from some other fuckery that's going on. But once you
Thank you.
stop showing it, then we going back to sleep, going back to, you know,
Yep.
loving Gucci and don't.
That's right.
I mean,
Well, because it's not trending anymore. And again, it's influencers that determine what is and isn't justice work, right? Hashtag the resistance, the wokeness industrial complex, because those are the ultimate arbiters that have deputized themselves as designating what is and is not the work, right?
Do you hear me? You hear me? And that's like the kind of sick, evil genius of capitalism is like, you can kind of reward people to kind of work against their group interests or self-interest by giving them individual trappings. So it's like,
right.
hey, we're going to make you a thought leader and yeah, we'll give you some money. You know, we'll
Thank
give you a
you.
book,
That's
you know,
right.
we'll give you whatever.
That's right.
As long as,
That's right.
As long as you're using the platform that we give you to lead people astray. Or to kind of reroute attention away from the establishment. And I mean, when I say establishment, I mean the harshest,
right.
you know, the harshest aspects of oppression. You know what I mean?
That's
the harshest,
right.
not just the agents of oppression. Because we got to be clear, there's not enough people in power to just oppress us in the way that we do, unless a lot of us were oppressing each other by kind of falling into, you know, these kind of, whether it's class stratification, racial stratification, gender stratification, political stratification, whatever. So us working against each other and basically misplaced aggression, you know what I mean? And then the one that's sitting back laughing is just
bringing in the money, right? So then they can try to colonize space because they're trashing the planet and we're not effectively fighting back. Like, we have some respect for ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
They're like, what we need to fund our mission to wherever else so we can go exploit them too.
Trash those planets too, because that's the answer, right? That's the way forward, clearly. Such, right, excellent students of history, obviously, right? Well, and you know, around that also, it's so important, if you ask me, that we do take it back to, right, acknowledging what does it feel like for folks to, right, name that kind of false consciousness that you are speaking to, and also to give folks a heads up if they might not be as versed yet in doing that work, right, that it can, right, it's not like it's linear and formulaic for everyone, but certainly speaking for myself, it gets so much easier, right? It's not like, even if the first time maybe someone feels in their body, right, some butterflies in their stomach, right, or they feel a little tongue-tied, or it feels really uncomfortable. After the 100th time that you've done it, or the 1000th time that you've done it, I hope people don't presume that it's going to feel the exact same way, right? Because we can make meaningful progress through these processes. And so there's nothing like honoring that learning curve to then be able to, right, invite ourselves to actually do the thing and not just presume, no, that's too hard, I'm not up for that, it's too challenging, it's too intimidating, and then just go back to sleep.
That is one of, in addition to outright violence, because we understand that, you know, like we said before, government has a monopoly on violence. So behind like law and order, all of that lies the kind of iron maiden of violence if you don't do what they do. But in addition to not only that and the projection of that power, that's another advantage that power has. It's not just the power that what it can actually do, it's the projection of what it can do that stops people from doing what they can do. So that, in addition to kind of socializing us into like, listen, you can't win. We're just too powerful. So you might as well not do anything. That is unfortunately very, very, very effective. But what we gotta understand is like, if that was true, why was so much energy, effort, money be put into convincing us of what we can't do?
That part. Yeah, you know, I saw the luminary Dr. Jackie Alexander speak at this conference honoring and commemorating the life of Dr. Angela Davis maybe 13 years ago. And one of the things that she said that is so important, if you ask me, is it's not if, but how. Like, it's not if you're going to show up with ethics, it's how. And when that's what we're centering, that is a fundamentally different conversation. It's not like, am I going to show up? Am I not going to show up? It's when we make that commitment to showing up, that opens up this universe of possibilities that we might not even perceive if we're not even looking for them, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, one thing, like, you're not going to actualize it if you can't think about it. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
I think it was Toni Morrison that said, if you can't conceive it, you can't achieve it. Like, if you can't imagine it, you can't have it. That's what she said. Because I don't want to be jacking Toni Morrison for that.
Sure. Yeah.
That's blasphemous.
Use paraphrase. Yeah.
Right.
That's real.
But no, she said, if you can't imagine it, you can't have it.
Thank you.
So this has to start in our imagination. Like, we have to imagine the world that we want to live in to bring it to fruition. And like, one thing that frustrates me in some kind of space is this idea that because something doesn't exist, it can't happen. When you give capitalist critique, you critique capitalism, and people say like, oh well, well, what else are we gonna do? Or this idea that because you don't have something in place that you can say is better, we can't say something is wrong or we can't change. But we got to understand.
Thank you.
The first person who made a car had never seen a car before.
Thank you.
Precisely. The Wright brothers, they made a plane. They never seen planes fly before. Thank you.
Right.
So yeah, it's gonna take some belief, and sometimes you gotta protect that, and that means like being like a level of discernment always, but being picky about who you let into your space, your energy when it comes to certain things.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Well, and I mean, cherishing our minds, having some respect for our imaginations, and having filters, and especially, what with this social media, so-called attention economy, where our minds are literally being mined, at a historically unprecedented level
in human history,
in all of recorded human history,
right?
People need to be magnificently safeguarding our imagination, like not just letting trash in and then expecting that you're going to be able to drop.
And the danger of that, is like, without that kind of that confirmation, people will say like, man, maybe this idea isn't popping because a lot of people not liking it, or a lot of people but come on, man, you can have somebody like them 6'9", and I ain't just beating up on this guy, but just whatever. There's tons of goofballs like that, where it's like, we obviously can't use people's attention as a metric for legitimacy.
Absolutely. Because again, this is not a popularity contest. Thank you.
Say it again?
Life is, this journey of actually getting free is not a popularity contest.
Right. Because it comes with risk.
Precisely. And the thing is, again, historically, like you said, like the people whose faces end up on t-shirts and hats 30 years later, we need to be honest about how they were actually received when they were alive. So often they made people uncomfortable. Folks were intimidated. People might have felt threatened because they were envying them to a deeper conscientiousness that was trending in their moment. That's
all the time. And if they're accepted before they pass, is usually when they can be kind of weaponized against progressive work, or even the same ethos of justice that they had in their youth.
Yep. Precisely.
Like, now we'll bring you on board and say you're acceptable, and they'll try to use this person's legitimacy against the kind of uprising, the contemporary uprising.
That's right.
And they'll say like, oh no, this is wrong. How y'all doing this wrong? How we did it back in the day was right. It's like, but they didn't like you back in the day. Now they
like this MLK industrial complex on the part of these liberal multicultural, like you wouldn't have been there for him when he was alive, and you don't even understand militarism. Like, did you just miss beyond Vietnam? Like, that was the year that he got assassinated. Like, you just apparently weren't paying attention enough to talk about his critique of the military industrial complex. I guess you just weren't paying attention when he's like, wow, I'm really doubting this integration into a burning house for my people. Pretend to even care about the people that are getting co-opted.
Yeah, the picking and choosing of what to highlight, the reducing of someone to a specific moment in their development when that can be reframed, and I mean, it's
Thank
really
you.
messy. And I also think like when we think of some of our ancestors that put in great work for justice globally, there's like this idea, the ones that the establishment accepts, they need to disseminate this kind of image of perfection within them. And the danger in that is like, it makes young folks say, well, damn, I could never be that because I'm not perfect.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
But
Absolutely.
you don't have to be perfect. You got to be committed. And this
Thank
person
you.
wasn't perfect either. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
But
That's
you know,
right.
yeah. So they'll hide whatever they think will take away from that in terms of the person that they're using. And if it comes to someone who, let's say, opposed the establishment in a non-acceptable way, let's say Malcolm X or Fandu Hamer or somebody, then they'll just kind of it's that benign neglect. They just won't mention them. They're like, oh, we're not gonna tear them down because we tear them down. That brings attention to it. We don't want to bring attention to the Fred Hamptons of the world, right?
That's
so we
right.
just won't
Not
say
so
nothing.
much. Nope, not so much. Well, and that, there's something that is so just deeply unacceptable to me around that in a moment like this uprising, where I'm seeing so many people literally having their understanding of this uprising algorithmically determined for them by the business people that have kicked down the most money to search engine optimization, who don't even know who Fred Hampton is. Random business people that are getting paid attention to more than, our freedom ancestors who are still alive, let alone the folks that have been taken out. And that needs to change yesterday.
100%. 100%. I mean, it's at this point, I mean, there is a kind of growing constituency of just like self-affirmed, and I don't want to, let me think how I want to word this. I'll put it like this. I've seen some blasphemous, disrespectful stuff that like kind of like when you look at people through this contemporary lens of like what's accepted social work or justice now, and they hold people to some impossible standards that like, and I don't mean in terms, I'm not saying that to justify harm, because I don't like that whole, somebody's a man of their times or woman of their time. That's bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Because if the times are wrong, then you got to be radical, right? But the thing that we got to understand is that applies now. If injustice is the law of the land, then you got to be a deviant. You got to be radical. And you got to be okay with that.
Proud to be maladjusted, as Dr. MLK said, right?
Yes. Because
Jiddu Krishnamurti it's not a sign of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So what does that mean for us? Are we willing to follow through, not just be like, wow, that's deep, that totally makes sense, yeah, I could see that, but no, like for the rest of our life, like pretend to want to integrate that wisdom. What does that mean?
Right. I mean, if we rejecting this bullshit, we got to reject it wholesale. Don't say I want some of your blood money. Don't say I want some of the stolen loot. Don't say I want some of your stolen humanity. And my only problem is when you do something that's a affront to me as an individual or some constituency that I'm a part of. But when you shitting on everybody else, I'm cool with it. Nah, that's garbage. We got to call that. We got to call that shit out.
Thank you. Well, and you see that so often in this kind of faux co-optation of the language is solidarity. Like, I'm here for solidarity if it means everybody else throwing down for me, but if it means me lifting a finger for, like, I don't know, Palestinians, then, like, this isn't what I meant by solidarity. Problematic. Like, people need to be honest, inconsistent. We can name hypocrisy. We need to yesterday.
Well, and I think that danger is like this kind of false equivalency that all damn oppression is the same. Like, I'm gonna be honest. That shit is infuriating. You know what I mean? Like, because if we see it for what it is, we understand this is a tool of the establishment. You know what I mean? This is a tool. This is a tool. Again, somebody say, oh, well, what does that have to do with the establishment? Again, back to what we said about the ability of power to legitimize and to reward and punish. If I reward you, then this becomes the kind of dominant outlook of what something is. So when you have, I won't say young people, but people who are kind of earlier in their kind of development of some kind of justice orientation, they look at certain spaces and say like, oh, okay, that's what the work is. Canceling people. Oh, that's what the work is. Solely calling out oppression, which is necessary. But what you gonna do about it? And
Precisely.
And this is something that is frustrating about not confronting power. Too many people socialize to think, if I say what the problem is, then like, hey, I see you doing this bad thing to me. What you gonna do? So what?
And what? Now
Power
what?
says, so what? What
That's
you gonna
right.
do about it? Power
That's right.
says, when you call out power, power says, no, that ain't happened. That's fake
Mm-hmm.
news.
Thank
That
you.
didn't happen.
Exactly.
And
That's
we'll
right.
be like, no, we just saw you do it. What do you mean? No, no, no.
Mm-hmm.
It's fake news. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So
Yeah. People
we
need to get over that.
yes, yes, we gotta
Yep.
be I was talking to, oh, I don't know who I was talking to about this yesterday. I mean, quick metaphor. And like family, I hope y'all understand what I'm saying. I'm gonna use this metaphor, but politics are just the backdrop to represent something bigger.
Mm.
So politics aside, if we talk
Yep.
about if we think about Obama and Trump, again, regardless
Mm.
of what people think about them as
Yep.
politicians, just
Yep.
their temperament.
Mm.
Trump comes in office, right? This is somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
used to being in power.
Yep.
He doesn't say, hey, I'm not going to do this thing because then the liberals or other people are going to think I did this. He's
Mm.
coming in signing executive orders like a
Thank
mother.
you.
He's just doing
That's right.
whatever he
That's
wants.
right.
He
That's
he
right.
doesn't say he doesn't say, hey, if I do this, they might think I gave somebody a job because he's my son. He's gonna say, so
Mm-hmm.
what? He was the best qualified. And then we try
And
to
what?
shame him and say, like, nah, he ain't the best qualified. That's nepotism.
Thank
He's
you.
like, nah, they ain't
Thank
happen.
you.
So
Thank you.
so in addition to just calling that out, we
Yep.
got to call out the socialization of good folk, the
Yes.
standard that we hold ourselves to do good
Right.
are not even
Right.
the rules that somebody who's doing harm is playing by. So this is what we'll say.
That part.
We'll get
Yep.
in power and say,
Mm.
well, so let's say you ask me, hey, DeJuan, I need you to do this thing for me. And I say, well, I don't want to do it because they might think I'm doing it for you just because I know you.
Right.
So what? So
Community
what?
accountability? Yeah.
If
And
you
why
have,
wouldn't you throw down for people that know you?
and especially, but here's the thing, and like, I want to be clear. I want to be clear on that. I'm not saying like
Yeah.
we get in power and do the same messed up shit they do. I'm
Of
talking
course.
about in terms of justice and in terms of doing
Mm.
good work.
That's
We
right. That's
set
right.
we set such an impossible standard
Mm.
for
Mm.
perfection that
Mm.
if somebody doesn't fit into all these damn categories, we just throw them in the trash.
Right.
And
Thank you.
that's very dangerous because the thing is,
Yep.
one, everybody can't do everything. And if you're
Mm.
committed to something, guess what?
Yep.
If you're
Mm.
good at something, your expertise in that is usually because you've got an overwhelming commitment to that thing. So it's
Thank
just not
you.
enough time in the day. But what people
Absolutely.
who are about injustice and oppression do, they'll lionize motherfuckers who ain't shit just
That's right.
because that person did something specific to help that they're
Yep.
benefiting from. So
Absolutely.
they'll say, well, we don't care about Christopher Columbus being a murderer,
Mm.
a rapist,
Sure.
a child
Yep.
molester. We don't care
Yep.
about that. He did
Mm.
this for us, so we're gonna lionize him.
Thank you.
We'll
Absolutely.
look
Well,
at
we need
somebody who did
Italian
good.
representation. Like that makes Italians proud. Get your mind out of the gutter.
Do you hear me?
Really?
You hear me? But
Wow.
we'll say, oh well, Martin Luther King, he was messing with a woman on the side of it, so we throwing him in the trash. And
Yep.
I don't want
Right.
to just make this about MLK, but that example
Sure.
is because
Sure.
he's who the dominant society kind of shoves
Of
like a kind of
course.
watered down version of him.
Absolutely. That's
You can
right.
do that with anybody.
That's right. Well, and the thing about that is, people really need to check their internalized capitalist propaganda. And so often that sort of disposability politics, right, is really one of the ways that this capitalist propaganda gets
Speak on it.
seeded into cancel culture, right, or call out culture. And the thing is around that, that's not for those of us that do work in, say, transformative justice, or for
Right.
those of us that do work in even, say, restorative justice, when that's not watered down by the nonprofit system,
Right.
We need to be able to make space for people to grow. And say, for me as an educator, right, it's important to be honest about the reality that, right, our minds have been colonized literally for over half a millennia.
Yeah.
The entire core curricula is designed to systemically and structurally gaslight us out of understanding the white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist, right?
That's inside of us.
Patriarchal colony that we are in right now for folks in the United States.
Right.
And so what does that mean in terms of making sure we're not just perpetuating that poison in our justice work, but substantially unlearning that? And that means we always already are gonna be just perpetuating that poison to the extent that it's impacted us, to the extent that we haven't exercised it out of us. We can anticipate that readily. So instead of being like, oh, you said something problematic, you're done for me forever, recognizing, of course that would be the case. So let's show up to do the work to do better.
And speaking of that, like, and I'm not beating up on, but there's a good example you use. Like, when we think of the word problematic in itself, like to some people, problematic has more use than context, than nuance,
Sure.
and that's a problem. And to be clear for the family that's watching, when we talk about redeemability, lack of a better word, or call out culture, we ain't talking about somebody who just on some bullshit. You see what I'm saying?
Thank you.
I'm talking
That's
about people who, because when we think about what's accepted as what's prioritized as acceptable thought, that can change. That can change from month to month. And like I said, where is that disseminated at? Usually in higher echelons of the academy that are lateral to other oppressive systems. So we got to be honest about that. And I think even the ones who aren't redeemable, when we call out, calling out the bullshit is not enough. We have to say, we are going to create a re-socializing system that kind of socializes people to not only not do that, but also people to combat that.
That's right.
But that's not what I see. I don't see enough things saying like, okay, we have a problem with this thing. How can we socialize people? One, not to do that. Socialize people to have some damn courage and integrity to call it out, because like we said, it can't exist without enablers, right? There is no that. It stops at calling out the bullshit. So we call out this specific individual, which, to be clear, this individual's on some bullshit, right? We call them out. Once they're held accountable, whether it's through the court of public opinion or the literal courts, now that's the end of the work. No, this person was just an agent of an ethos, an agent of a thing, because that whatever they did does not stop if we don't create a system to punish the acts of doing that, and also the enablers that allow it.
Yeah, and get to the root of that weed that's going to be growing in all of the spaces until we pull it, and then until we create those alternative structures that are actually going to support us, you know?
Speak on it.
And the thing that I really appreciate that you mentioned earlier related to strategy is, so many folks don't even know, say, the history of leadership trainings specifically being in the settler colonial U.S. to attempt to diffuse revolutionary zeal, especially in the context of the civil rights movement. Like, people can learn about the history of foundations and the nonprofit industrial complex. Exactly. And how it is as alive and well right now as it has ever been. So people need to understand that careerism, that opportunism, that tokenism, precisely respectability politics in those particular ways, seeking the legitimacy of our oppressors as the matrix or the metric to determine how we're showing up in the world and to this work, people really need to unlearn that, because there's nothing strategic about that if we're truing to our collective liberation. Like what you said about time earlier, the thing that in part for me is so devastating about when people say, oh, somebody was before their time, is that means that your interpretation of that time is an oppressive interpretation of that time. People, millennia into the future could be talking about this moment as our moment in time, not as Trump's moment in time. So we need to actually have some discernment in terms of the stories that we're telling, instead of just naturalizing or normalizing that, because then it continues this kind of delegitimating of truth tellers, and the people that are not trying to just speak truth to power. Donald Trump never needs to hear anything from any of this or from us. We need to be speaking to one another. Speaking truth about power is not the same as speaking truth to power. You know, it's like this idea that Democrats are going into dialogue with Republicans, and they're literally going into a knife fight with pretty arguments.
That's right.
Nothing strategic about that. That's a recipe to die, and people 100%. Are still completely misunderstanding, what actually makes sense tactically in this moment. And it's not appealing to the morality of our oppressors or trying to talk with, right, authority figures.
That's it.
At the expense of talking with one another.
Talking with each other with the intent to actually act. Like I'll
to
tell you
then
all
know what
day.
to do.
Look, I got all the time in the day to talk as long as that talking is going to inform action. But if it's not going to lead to action, and if that action isn't going to lay siege to kind of real world oppressive shit, then
Thank you.
I ain't wasting my damn time. You know what I mean? So this is what we got to understand. Talking is important. Planning is important. But sometimes we get stuck there. And usually that's because you're not going to be punished for just talking, but you'll be punished for acting, right?
Convenient.
So I also think, like, in terms of what you said about history, which was a great point about, you know, someone having an oppressive orientation of like a certain time in history, that there were radicals. There were people who were ruthlessly righteous and about justice during that time. They're just not people that are being highlighted. I also think like we as, you know, just globally, we got to get out of the idea of seeing history as just the collection of damn dates and times, and understand every point in history was at the edge of history during that time. This point that we're talking right now, we're at the edge of history. So we got to hold ourselves to the same standard that we would hold anybody else, because when they were around this kind of, I'll say, different types of oppressive realities, that was normal. But too many people didn't see it as abnormal because everybody was doing it. But again, we always circle back to the creation of normality and how normality is not fucking real. It is usually what whoever's in a position of power disseminates in the consciousness it creates, and that normality almost always serves their benefit. So if we say oppression is normal, inequality is normal, injustice is normal, we have to create a new normal. Creating that new normal, it can be calling out the bullshit, but it also needs to be shaping an alternative.
Thank you.
Know what I mean?
That's
and
right.
not giving
That's
a damn about what anyone else tells us is acceptable or not.
That's right. That's right. Having some accountability to our ancestors, having some accountability to our descendants, to our potential, to one another, to what we know is actually true in our bodies. And that's not about what's trending. Frankly, that we can, just like we've been talking about, actually acknowledge is usually not what's trending. That's actually quite often a litmus test, right? Probably not going to be in the corporate media. So we need to get hip to that instead of seeking some validation from the system that's destroying us.
I'll give you an example. If we are fighting, if we're in any kind of combat, if my enemy likes what I'm doing, I'm probably doing something wrong, right? I'm probably messing up. If my oppressor don't have a problem with what I'm doing, you know, I might not be doing legitimate work.
That's right. In the world, is there retaliation? Is there blowback? Because if not, what does that mean, right? You're probably gonna receive a response if you are actually materially confronting power.
That's right. In some way, that doesn't always mean it's gonna be some kind of hyper violent or you know, depending on what it is. But if they're putting your ass on you know, on the front page, you know, of their paper, and I don't know, and I think these kind of, I'll say, hand-picked puppets. Sometimes we gotta, family, we gotta be very. Our discernment has to be on point. We have to say, okay, who's choosing this? Who's calling this meeting? If they say hey y'all, we meeting at 8 o'clock, and we who's calling this meeting?
Thank you.
You know, what's there for this? We got to get hip. We got to get hip. And learning from, and I think maybe this is an element of human nature. We have a natural feeling that because technology has advanced in certain ways, we're more intelligent than people, institutions, organizations than in the past. But we don't understand the only reason we have what we have now is because we can build on what other people learned then. That's it. If every time a generation passed, all their knowledge was burned down and we started over, we would still be in the fucking Stone Age. You know what I mean?
Would we have fire? Maybe not.
Probably not.
Exactly.
But that's what I mean. And this idea that okay, well shit, man, you know, we you know, we got all this. We must be light on our feet. But when you really and I don't just mean that in terms of intelligence. If we talk about our commitment to justice and the risk that we're willing to take, we're so damn comfortable right now. You know what I mean? And I'm not talking about. I'm talking about the majority of
That's
people.
right.
I mean, and I think like that's something that we have to be honest about. Like as bad as things are,
right?
You know, in recorded history, you know, things will. I'll put it like this: there's more accountability now than there has been before, and that's just by virtue of like you know, globalization and things like that. So I think we really have to understand the type of risk that people were willing to take for you know real justice. So I think the establishment right now, there's a priority of like, all right, how do we make this oppression less overtly harmful so people don't connect and say fuck this shit? You see what I'm saying? How can we make it just smooth enough where they like, okay, damn, I can't do shit, but in my mind I may be able to, and then you know minimize, like we said, the kind of outright, you know, aggressive terrorism, because that's when they rise up and say something's wrong, even though they know it is all the damn time.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, discourage people from fighting back through big lies so you don't have to use a big stick, right? And then if people are so deluded by the big lies, they might think, I don't see a stick anywhere, thus we must be free.
Right. But you know the stick is behind the lies if you don't believe it. Because here's the thing.
That's right.
Somebody who is you know, in a position of power, like y'all, it takes work to physically harm people. Because now I've got, if I'm holding you down, I've got to commit my time to putting my foot,
that's right,
my knee on your neck, you know, pun intended. I've got to commit time to that. But if I can convince you to lay down and stay down without me being there, I can go out and find other people to oppress.
Like where we are right now. Exactly. Yeah, the most effective forms of police states are ones where the cops in our head, like how many of our movement ancestors let us know. And would you believe it's already time for us to begin wrapping up?
What?
Why am I not surprised?
Time flowing.
Right.
It's all good. Did we have some, you said you wanted to get some questions on this joint too, right?
You know, we can actually address those when I post this on Instagram TV later. So I'm just wondering if you might want to share anything in closing, wrapping up everything that we've been getting into for our folks that might be really seeking some higher level discernment, elevating the dialogue around these pieces.
Yeah, well, first thing first, I want to say, you know, much love and respect to everybody who's on the live. Now, I say this on every live I do. Like, look, there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now. And we understand, you know, just how enticing escapism is. But if you're on this live, to a certain degree, you know, I feel like you're part of a larger global justice family, and you got to know, regardless of where you at, you know, you're not crazy, that you're just sane in an insane system. And and I also think being reaffirming each other. One of my good friends, we always talk about being each other's revolutionary battery recharger. That's very important because this stuff wears on you, you know, and you can get like the oppression wants you to be a pessimist, you know what I mean?
Thank you.
But we got to be optimistic. We got to stay forward. It's no different than that that kind of man behind the curtain type thing, right? The majority of the establishment power is in its ability to project the power that it has, right? But they would not feel the need to protect that power if that didn't take some resources and some time. So I just want to say that. So just, you know, keep working.
Yeah, I appreciate those words. Yes, no, thank you for that. And I would also just want to thank everyone for coming through, for taking this time and energy. And as we are parting ways right now, I just want to thank folks for tuning in and to invite folks, if you're open to it, right, as we are hanging up, instead of just jumping right back into scrolling, if you are open to just pausing for a moment to integrate, right, some of what we just shared, like maybe if you want to jot down a reflection, maybe if you're open to seeing what's in your body right before just jumping back into whatever's next, encourage that. And to want to thank you so much for taking the time and the energy.
Thank you. Real quick, how much time is on that timer?
1 minute.
Okay, so another thing I want to say, you all listen, when we have these conversations, in my mind, whatever live I'm doing, family, we on a damn live, right? Anybody could be on this joint. So it's kind of like kind of a vaguer like idea that kind of brings everybody in. But when it comes to certain things, there's gonna be a lot of conversations and a lot of building that has to take place offline. There's times that you're gonna have to call folk. You got to meet folk. So let this be kind of like the casting of a wide justice net. We'll call it a justice net. And when you make those connections, then build, strategize, because don't just get off the live and be like, oh, they were talking that good talk, and then go back to escapism.
Thank you.
You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Use this to motivate you to kind of anyway, you know what it is. You know what it is. I don't want to. We about to go off on
that.
Timer.
Yes, no, thank you so much for that closing note around security culture and extending the work out and making those connections.
Discernment.
All right, well, be well, y'all.
That's it for today's episode of Feral Visions, a decolonial feminist podcast brought to you by Liberation Spring. I've been your host, Anjali Nathupadia, and I thank you for listening. I'm also curious to know what this dialogue evoked for you. I invite you to post your reflections and questions in the comments section below to continue our collective journey of unlearning, remembering, and imagining. If you want to share feedback, such as segment ideas or potential guests you'd like to hear on the show, email liberationspring@gmail.com. And don't forget to follow Feral Visions on SoundCloud or iTunes, where you can find our show archive. If you'd like more information on this show's topic or to donate to the project, check out liberationspring.com. Thanks to Catherine Petru and Nicole Gervasio of our technical production team, and Climbing Poetry for our theme song. Be sure to tune in for next week's episode. And, in the meantime, let's make our ancestors proud.
The power of the people is louder than the evil, deceitful and coward. People in power, all power to the people. It's the hour of the peaceful. Freedom is ours, yeah. Freedom is ours.